What's up, guys and gals? Blazebeat Racing coming at you on the tube today. I've decided I'm going to be mixing things up this time. Instead of posting a music video or an anime edit or a car driving video, I'm going to be talking about how I got into cars, how I became a true car enthusiast, and mostly how Initial D and Wangan Midnight really changed my life. And I'll have pictures of the cars I've had and some stories of them mixed in that I hope you guys will enjoy. I'll have some videos, probably some clips from Wangan Midnight and pictures from the Wangan Midnight manga and Initial D manga. I can't really post videos of Initial D anime because AVEX blocks those videos hilariously. They seem to be okay with my Wangan Midnight videos, but not the Initial D edits. Anyway, so as a kid, I was always into cars. I was always racing my toy Hot Wheels around on the floor when I was a little toddler. And every Friday my dad would come home and buy me a Hot Wheels car, and that was like one of the highlights of my week. Was him bringing home another cool little Hot Wheel car. But as I got a little older, the next big thing was go-kart racing, and my dad and he would take me out to a little go-kart track out in the country, and we'd have a good old race against each other. It was a nice little layout, actually. Lots of nice twisty turns and hills and stuff. So we had lots of fun with that, and I actually was really competitive for how young I was, and I had a natural talent for it. But so finally, by the time I was 16, I was raring to get my license, and unfortunately, the only vehicle my family had was this massive, ugly, extremely slow van. And as you can imagine, I didn't really find this van that enjoyable to drive. In the fast lane, I'd have that thing floored just trying to pass a bus, and we'd just be crawling by the bus. People in the bus looking at us like, are you going to pass, or are you going to just block the fast lane traffic? And there's just no point really in trying to pass people with that thing, let alone trying to even take corners with it. But I really was on the hunt for a real sports car. So my dad was going to chip in half, and I found this 1986 Toyota MR2 Mark I. That's a mid-engine, rear-wheel drive, two-seater sports car. And this little car only had 39,000 kilometers on it since an engine rebuild. And that engine sounded amazing. Right behind your head, I still haven't heard a four-cylinder engine that sounds as good as that one in person. Or even online, I've heard engines that sound as good, but not better. Anyway, the problem was that learning stick shift when you were first getting to learn the rules of the road was a little bit overwhelming. And I wouldn't recommend that to anybody. I'd recommend driving for maybe half a year on an automatic, getting the basics down, and then learning to drive standard. It was a little bit overwhelming, and I ended up just parking the car in the garage most of the time and taking out once a week with my dad. But I never really tapped into that car's potential. I did drift it a couple times. The car felt really balanced and peppy, and I never even drove it to school once, even though I had the nicest sports car out of all the kids at that parking lot. But I didn't really care about my reputation. I was a total loner, and I couldn't relate to anybody there, so I just wanted to get out of that school, basically. So after I graduated, I got a job, saved up a little more money, and I sold the MR2, and I bought a Toyota Celica, a 92 Toyota Celica GTS, 5-speed, and it had the 2.2 liter twin cam. It was a fun car, but had some understeer though, that's for sure. But I wasn't pushing it at all when I first bought it, and I was starting to get into the groove of driving standard. I passed my N test, so I had my N, and so I was on a roll, and I was finally becoming a confident driver, and I started working as a driver at a shop in the next town over, and I got to drive hundreds and hundreds of nice cars at that shop. And I don't know how the heck they trusted me with them, because I was still pretty new to driving. But they let me drive $80,000 cars sometimes. I got to drive old Porsches, new Camaros, like anything. And I still felt that that shifter in that Celica GTS felt better than any car I drove there. The combination of the clutch and shifter and how smooth it felt. And to this day, the only car that I've driven that has as nice a feeling shifter as that Celica GTS is my Datsun 280 ZX. But I still wasn't driving the Celica anywhere near its potential, and I was really thinking about gas mileage and conserving tire wear and all that stuff. You know, just trying to be super efficient, driving it kind of like an old lady. And I would barely ever take the car over 3,500 RPM. And now when I look back at it, it's like, how the heck did I even merge on the highway like without dying with that car at 3,500 RPM? It's just nuts. But I managed to do it. I was a safe driver apparently. And it was at about this time that I stumbled across Initial D. One night I was scrolling through an alphabetical order list of different anime to see if anything caught my eye, and I saw there was Initial D, and my last initial is D, so naturally I clicked on it, and it happened to be about cars, and that piqued my interest. So I watched the first couple episodes of season 2, which at the time I thought was season 1 because it wasn't labeled properly, and I was pretty confused honestly, and I wasn't that into it because I thought those two Evo drivers from season 2 were the main characters, so I was kind of displeased with that, and the character introductions were pretty garbage for like a main character, you know. So then I figured out that this was season 2 after a couple episodes, and I went to season 1, found it, and after a few episodes of that, I was pretty much hooked. And as I continued watching through the episodes of Initial D, I found that it was inspiring me to become a better driver and, you know, push my skills a little more and learn more about my car. And, you know, kind of like Takumi in season 1. And so my Celica GTS, it didn't have a whole lot of potential, but it was related to the Celica GT4, the ST185, which was a rally champion car. Even though the Celica GTS was basically known as the poor man's Supra, but I mean, with my budget, it did the job. So I would take it up the Forest Service roads, and I was learning how to do handbrake slides, and I pulled my first perfect 180 on my second try. The first try was almost perfect, and that was exciting because you have to really commit to that to be able to do it right. And you know how it is, you got to break that wall, you got to break that the barrier of fear of going into the ditch. And I didn't even come close to going into the ditch, and I was pretty stoked. So anyway, I started doing downhill runs on the Forest Service roads. There was no other cars on them, and I was able to overcome the understeer just by the way that I entered the corners. And if the back end slid out a bit, I would just counter steer, and it was really fun. So I gained a lot of driving skills that way, even though I would definitely not recommend honing your skills on dirt mountain passes. But I had finally started tapping into my car's true potential, and I was no longer shifting at 3,000 RPM. I was shifting at 5,000 RPM in the power band, and it was a lot more fun. Everything is just more exciting, and you can hear the engine, and it had a great sounding engine. It was just lots of fun, and sadly, by that time, the car was developing a lot of issues because it had close to 300,000 kilometers on it. It was beginning to burn oil, and I replaced the struts on it, but the brakes were all going on it, and it also was had some sort of idling problem that I couldn't figure out, that the mechanics couldn't figure out either. It would sometimes just stall at stop signs and stuff, just trying to hold idle. But so I decided that it's time to upgrade to my next car, something longer term, and I ended up buying a classic Mini before I sold the Celica. Before the Celica actually was crapping out, I had bought a 1976 classic Mini, and my whole strategy with buying that car was that if I buy a really slow car, that I can't get myself into too much trouble, but I can still have a lot of fun driving it. And that philosophy is a really good angle to come at it if you're a speed freak like me. Sadly, the Austin Mini turned out to be a bit of a basket case, and I had to rebuild the whole car from the ground up. Thankfully, it had very little rust, so that didn't take long to deal with the rust, but it needed a lot of replacement parts, full brakes, suspension, electrical, lots of little doodads and stuff. So I was learning a lot about cars, and my dad helped me a lot. And the sad thing is, by the time I was finished turning the little Mini into a track car, which was like my dream initially, but I didn't trust the car by the time I was done, because it just seemed like everything would break if I pushed the car hard on a regular basis, which was pretty much my driving style by that time, was shifting in the power band every day and pushing cars through the corners hard, like the way sports cars are made to be driven. I would drive them like that every day, and I still do, within reason of driving on public roads, of course. But apparently it was twice as fast as a stock 1000cc Mini, according to the amount of horsepower it was making. But that wasn't enough for me. I didn't find as much enjoyment with it, and the car definitely had some understeer. It did handle amazing, but it still had understeer, as all front wheel drives do, which is one thing that I can't really stand when you're out for a spirited drive and your front end starts plowing. That's pretty annoying. But I decided to sell that car so that I wouldn't abuse it too much, and I wanted it to go to good owners. Found some good owners for it, and ended up buying a Datsun 280ZX while I still had the Mini. And I had to drive that ZX through the winter. And the story of how I found that 280ZX goes like this. I was looking on Craigslist one night. It was 11 o'clock, and I typed in 280ZX, and boom, first one that pops up. Beautiful white Datsun 280ZX. Looks to be in pretty good shape. My family was still awake. They were watching Star Wars. I asked my dad, "Hey dude, you gotta check this thing out. Can we go check it out tonight?" And he was pretty stoked on it. I mean, we didn't expect it to be as good as it looked, and we didn't expect to be able to even check it out that night, but we phoned the guy. He actually answered the phone and was willing to show us the car that night, and it was a 1-hour drive away. We got there at midnight in the pouring rain, pitch black. He came out. He was really excited to see us. I got in the car, fired it up. It had a really lopey idle because it needed a tune, not because it had a performance cam, unfortunately. But it sounded amazing. The car looked great, even though we couldn't get that good of a look at it. And I took it for a little drive. Everything felt amazing, and I got a really good deal on that car from the guy. And he proceeded to show us his Datsun collection of race cars, and he had a lot of really cool cars, like old Toyota Celicas and 1200 Datsun 1200s, and he didn't have any other actually he did have one other Z car that was a really nice built 240Z with the aero kit, and that was a pretty sick little car. But he had some 510s in there, and so that was really interesting. So we spent over an hour that night just looking at his car collection and talking about cars and stuff. And the funny thing is, my brother ended up buying a Toyota Corolla, a 1971 Corolla 5-speed from the guy this past year on the very day, the anniversary day of the 4th year anniversary of when I bought the Datsun 280ZX. It's just crazy that happened to be quite the coincidence, but I really felt a connection to that 280ZX, and I still have it for a reason. Shortly after buying that 280ZX, I had finished watching Initial D, and I wanted to see if there was any anime that had a classic Z car in it, and sure enough, there was Wangan Midnight. So I started watching Wangan Midnight, and I really got into it because I can really connect to the characters in that anime, and I really share the same passion for speed and tuning. A lot of Initial D fans can't relate because Initial D really reaches out to a much broader audience. So I don't know why Wangan Midnight gets so much hate. It's like they find it to be a copycat of Initial D, but in reality, Wangan Midnight, the manga, came out years before the Initial D manga, and they're completely different, and they're both loosely based on true stories. You can do your research. The real Midnight Club Double Z was a 280ZX L28 twin turbo, and I had no idea it was actually a 280ZX at the time. I didn't know it was based on a real racing team. There would be no Wangan Midnight anime without the real Midnight Club racing team from Tokyo. So the downside to me watching Wangan Midnight is that it was causing me to be more addicted to speed, and my car, I felt that it was begging me to go faster. The engine really has that kind of gurgle that's just begging you to step on the gas on the highway, and Wangan Midnight was feeding the fire for sure. So I started going to and from work a little faster each week, and next thing you know, I'm going 160 on a regular basis, and then I'm going 180 every day to and from work. If the traffic was heavy, I'd still go only a little over the speed limit, but if it was pretty clear, then I'd be flying. I'd be blowing past cars with it. And you know, one night after doing this for 2 months, I think it was, and it was in winter, by the way, I had a really bad day at work, and I was really frustrated, and I had to get off work really late because I had to work late, but it was like the middle of the night, and I decided to blow off some steam by mashing the pedal into the floor on the highway, and I pushed the Z to its absolute limits that night. Even though it had studded tires, not rated for high speed obviously, the steering wheel was shaking, suspension not set up for high speed, and I just had the sound system blaring to try and drown out all the wind noise, because it's just screaming wind at that speed. And so I was having a good time though, and I forgot all about work, and I went whipping around a swooping corner at 180, passing a semi on the inside, and that was pretty crazy. I mean, I know the limits of my car, but this is insanity. I was disregarding police ambush points, and I didn't really care anymore at this point. I was so addicted to high speed, but the cure was well on its way. Little did I know. Anyway, so I started to come up on the next town, and the highway goes past that town, and my car's got Datsun dealer headers. They were optioned at the dealer, and it's got a cat delete, and as you can imagine, engine braking is very loud, and the car just screams engine braking, especially at high speed. So I basically went screaming past that town, and I was engine braking because there was a long swooping corner coming up, and I entered that corner going over 160, and if there's one thing I'm good at, it's judging perfect entry speed into corners. I just was whipping around that corner, the back end was just breaking loose a little bit, just the right amount. I mean, if you're suicidal anyway. There was no cars on the highway, and the road was very dry for a winter day. It was more like a fall night is what it felt like. And I saw a little flash of red in my rearview mirror, just out of the corner of my eye. I saw a quick flash of red. I looked in the mirror. I didn't see anything. I looked hard in the mirror after going around that corner. I could not see anything, but it got my heart pounding for a few seconds. And then I realized there was two small hatchbacks ahead of me, blocking both lanes, going only 80 kilometers an hour up ahead. So I had to slow down for them, and they backed me up quite a bit. Finally, I got around them. Shortly after that, I pulled off the highway. Then, popping up from behind them was another set of headlights, and this set of headlights was very intimidating. And I instantly felt like I need to start going the speed limit. So I was going up this hill, following the speed limit, and he was tailgating me. Whoever this driver was, all I can see is headlights. Obviously, I don't know what kind of car it is or what color because it's the middle of the night, but I felt very intimidated by this car. And they were continuing to tailgate me up this hill, and I needed to make a decision. So either this person was phoning the police because they were pissed that I was speeding, or they wanted to race me. Either way, I need to lose them. And thankfully there was a set of zigzags at the top of the hill, so I gunned this thing, whipped around those zigzags, and I was losing them. As soon as I pulled out of the zigzags, suddenly the sirens and red and blue lights come on, and I realized that's a cop car back there. And the guy came out of the car, and he was pissed. He had his hand on his pistol, on the holster, like ready to draw as he approached my car. He thought I had stolen it because I had such a clean driving record. So he wasn't sure what to expect. Understandable, and I thought for sure I'd lose this car, and he went really easy on me because I was very respectful, and so I had to have the car impounded. Unfortunately, I got fined a whack load of money, and I now have a permanent criminal record because of it. He had known how fast I was going, and that's why he was so angry. He had his cop car, I think it was a Crown Vic. He had that thing on the speed limiter just pinned to try and catch up to me on the highway, but he must have been so far behind because I couldn't even see him in my rearview mirror. But when I got jammed up behind those two little hatchbacks, that's when he must have really closed the gap, and when I got in front of him, then he snuck up behind them and then ambushed me when I pulled off the highway. He didn't want to turn his sirens or lights on because he didn't want to provoke me into a high-speed chase, as if it wasn't already. Basically, I just didn't know it. The consequences for doing something like that nowadays are twice as bad as back then. I did get my car back from the impound, and I was really stoked to have it back, and I started treating the car better and restoring it consistently. I'm still not finished restoring it. I mean, classic cars, you're never really 100% done, especially if you're trying to build the car slowly. But the car's come a very long way since I bought it. I've perfected the suspension, and the car's looking really good, and I'm really happy with it. Now I'm working more on the horsepower upgrades next year. That year also happened to be the same year that I introduced my little brother to Initial D, and he wasn't really into it that much at first, but after a little while, it started catching on. He started really getting into it, inspired by it, and unfortunately all he had at the time was a Toyota RAV4, and I taught him how to drift that RAV4 in the snow. Handbrake drifting I find to be really fun, and it was very easy to teach him. He caught on pretty quick, and then he really didn't feel like hanging on to that RAV4 much longer after getting into Initial D, so he sold it. He bought a really nice kitted out Nissan 240SX, and it was a really good introductory sports car for him, and he started expanding his driving skills very quickly and started to drift on the streets, but he was getting a little bit overconfident, as you can imagine, because you know, all that inspiration from watching the Takumi versus Keisuke battle in the middle of the night, just like most kids would that are really into Initial D. But he pushed it too hard in the rain, ended up crashing into a ditch with it, and thankfully it only damaged the bumper. So he replaced the bumper, painted it nicely. He customized the bumper so it was like a one-off bumper, pretty cool. And he had to sell it, unfortunately, that car, to pay for other things. And now he's working on that 71 Corolla, as I mentioned, and that's going to be a really nice classic, putting a wide body kit on it and everything. And throughout this whole experience, my brother always looked up to me as like the Rai Takahashi brother, because I'm always very calculated with my driving, and I spend a lot of time researching and analyzing on the computer, just like Rai Takahashi. And he thought of himself as the younger Keisuke Takahashi. You know, he kind of had the same hair and the same attitude, same kind of flair coming into driving, you know, a little more risky. But I told him straight up, you know, we were more like Iketani and Kenji. But that's probably the reality of it. I don't know. It's all on personal opinion. But anyway, Initial D really helped me realize my passion for driving, and really helped me push my driving skills to the next level, and kick-started that whole thing. And I really never was a spirited driver before watching Initial D. You know, I was always babying cars and more concerned about mileage and being easy on my tires. But it really helped me develop as a driver. And then when Wangan Midnight came along, I really started learning more about tuning cars, and really that's what Wangan Midnight's all about, you know, creating a car, building a car, and then pushing the limits with it, one way or another. And I wouldn't recommend doing that on public streets, obviously. Take it to the autocross track, take it to the racetrack if you're lucky enough to have one of those near you, or, you know, if you're into drag racing, that's great too. But I really enjoy working on my car when I know that it's going to pay off, and the Z really pays it back, because the driving experience is like nothing else. It's not the fastest car, but it really has the greatest driving experience out of any car I've ever driven. Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video, and thanks for supporting my channel. And you're welcome to comment below and tell me maybe a bit about how Initial D or Wangan Midnight have inspired you in one way or another, or maybe changed your life a bit. So yeah, I'll see you next time, and stay tuned to my channel, guys. There'll be more card videos coming up.